Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marcelo Ferraro. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice and the Watson Institute. And I'm here today to present Bruno Lima and his lecture, Luiz Gama, a Black Abolitionist in Brazil. In the spring, I organized the seminar series Slavery, Democracy, and Racial Violence in the Americas. The seminar provided lectures in which scholars discussed the legacies of colonialism and the enslavement of indigenous and African peoples in the making of racialized societies in the Americas. As I argued then, one of the main objectives of this initiative was to move beyond the American paradigm of race, racism, and racial violence, and review the complexity and diversity of such phenomena in Latin America and the Caribbean. And yet, this is also a history of people of African and indigenous descent who resisted the historical injustices of their time. So this brings us to a different lecture today. African Americans have historically mobilized themselves against more explicit forms of racism in the United States. Meanwhile, Afro-Latin Americans have struggled to do the same, confronting powerful ideologies of racial harmony. Today, we will learn more about slavery and racism in Brazil. However, we will focus on one of the most extraordinary individual experiences of Black resistance in the Americas. The biography of Black poet, lawyer, and activist Luiz Gama is only comparable to the trajectory of Frederick Douglass. From freedom to bondage, and from bondage to freedom, Gama became one of the most prominent legal activists and Black abolitionists in Brazil, perhaps in the 19th century Americas. However, his life story remains unknown to most people in Brazil and across the continent. This is changing now. Bruno Lima has published the collected works of Luiz Gama, and his forthcoming book shows that Gama's legal work helped approximately 700 enslaved people achieve freedom. Based on 1,000 previously unknown sources, he presents how this extraordinary and unprecedented feat was accomplished. Bruno Rodrigues de Lima holds a JD from the State University of Bahia, an LLM from the University of Brasilia, both in Brazil, and a PhD in legal history from the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University of Frankfurt in Germany, with a thesis on the legal work of the Black abolitionist Luiz Gama. Currently, he is a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Multidisciplinary Theory of Law at the Max Planck Institute for Legal History and Legal Theory, also in Germany, and he's the editor of the 11 volumes of Luiz Gama's complete works. Bruno, it's a pleasure to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much for such kind introduction. It's a pleasure, it's an honor to be here at the Center for Study of Slavery and Justice here at Brown University. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you very much for having me, and my special greetings to Professor Tony Bogues, Director of the Center, and Kiku Lansdorf as well, for arranging all details and making my stay here in Providence as pleasant as possible. And my friend, a brilliant scholar and public historian, well recognized in Brazil, Marcelo Ferraro. Thank you so much, and also for the audience. You know, it's really good to be here talking with you all. So I'll do my thanks a lot for the opportunity. I'll do my best to match it, even though I must say English not being my first language, it's really a task, a challenge, and sometimes I face some difficulties in speaking it. I lived in the US back in the 90s as a legal immigrant, so I learned something, and but I forgot it, and then I'm coming back to the finding the beauties of this language, right? So today I'm here to talk about my research. So I will read mostly the presentation and trying to make some comments on a more freestyle basis after that. But today I'm here to talk about my research on a Brazilian abolitionist who can be compared to the American hero Frederick Douglass. And since my research is based on local archives, what led me to find and study more than 1,000 historical sources unknown to the experts, it's fair that I start by saying that the first time I went into an archive to look for evidence of Luiz Gama's abolitionist struggle was back in 2003. At the time, I was a teenager and a sort of political activist of the social movement that led to the victory of the Quilombo Brotas land demarcation. Quilombo, as you know, is a Maroon community or descendants of Maroon, formerly, as you know, formerly escaped enslaved people that found a land and built up a new life at cost of much effort and blood. You know? According to the Brazilian Constitution, every, quote, remaining Quilombo community, unquote, that proves its background will have the rights to its land and the recognition of the state. In a country where the property owned by black people is customarily disturbed, having a recognition title from the federal government matters a lot. So the board of the newly founded civil rights organization, Quilombo Brotas, asked me to go to the city's local archive to search for the Quilombo's history and indicated that I should also search for the black lawyer, Luiz Gama. By finding the black abolitionist movement in the city, this was the hypothesis, one could find the roots of the Quilombo. So I went to the archives and located some papers, books, and documents, and I found evidence of Luiz Gama's abolitionism in that small city, which in the second half of the 9th century was one of the largest concentrations of enslaved black people in the world. Part of my teenager findings were included in the lawsuit that won the case for the, quote, first urban Quilombo in the country, unquote. In 2009, President Lula personally gave the title of recognition of that Quilombola land to José Roberto Barbosa, my friend and at the time president of the Quilombo Brotas Association, an organization of which I am honored to be a member since its foundation in March 2003. What started as an engaged political activity turned over time into a professional job of archival research and academic writing. I entered law school the first in my family to do so, and my bachelor thesis was an analysis of a lawsuit from Luiz Gama. I then started my master's degree also investigating Luiz Gama and the Brazilian abolitionist movement, and finally wrote my doctoral thesis on Luiz Gama's legal works. As I learned early to go to the archives, I repeat, back in 2003, I gained experience over time and somehow managed to master the complex world of the slavery archives in the country where the government in 1890 ordered the burning of all the papers proving not only the occurrence of this crime against humanity, that is, the slavery against black people, but also its illegality, since Brazilian law prohibited the slave trade to Brazil, a topic that we can discuss a bit more later. In the last almost 20 years, therefore, I've been reading, researching, and discussing Luiz Gama's biography and the history of black people fighting in slavery in Brazil and creating paths to freedom. I've been to more than 200 places, including schools, universities, quilombos, and courthouses, to talk about Gama's struggle and legacy. This is what brings me here to the Center for Study. Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice here at Brown University. And many thanks again for the invitation. Well, there are some ways to talk about the biography of a historical character. The most common one is undoubtedly to narrate a sequence of events that took place from the cradle to the grave. I'll go with the PowerPoint. Certainly, there is someone here who has heard or told one or more stories in this way. Even though it has didactic gains, telling a story in such a way can weaken the in-depth understanding of broader historical processes. Since we are in a very qualified audience, I have chosen not to start the story from the birth of the historical character, Luiz Gama, but to first show a glimpse of his abolitionist struggle to better situate him in the global context immediately after the end of the American, or why not just say global, Civil War. After that, I'll propose 2 questions to the audience and try to give clues for us to think together these questions. That seems okay for you? It's fine? Okay. So, I'll ask your attention to this image that, in my argument, is the beginning of the abolitionist movement in Brazil. Precisely in São Paulo, the region which concentrated the largest quantity of enslaved black people in the world. And this is Luiz Gama. Let me see. Yeah, this is Luiz Gama. And by the way, that's the only full body representation of him. What we see here is the young Italian artist Angelo Agostini's view of a meeting of the São Paulo Liberal Party that took place in January 1867. That's the size for us to understand the global context, right? Like 1.5 years after the end of the Civil War here in the United States. A talented artist of anarchist political leanings, Agostini was careful to imprint many semantic layers on a black and white drawing. We can see that the Liberal Party was split down the middle, but we can see much more. To begin with, among the more than 40 white men, there is only one black man, right? On one side, powerful politicians like the former minister, deputy, and law professor José Bonifácio, alongside the former local governors Silva Carrão and Joaquim Floriano, and the appeal court judge and banker Gavião Peixoto. As in A Perfect Crime, the historiography praises them as abolitionist champions, especially the law professor Bonifácio at the center. All evidence, however, points to the umbilical commitment to the politics of slavery, their political commitment to the politics of slavery. Now let's look at Gama's posture and compare it with the others. They all carry a stick, right? Or a bat or a club, yeah, right? Only one of them threatens to use it. Luiz Gama. All of them are wearing a closed shirt and a tie. Only Gama has his shirt open. All of them have their, All of them have their sleeves closed and buttoned. Gama doesn't. He has them rolled up. By the way, it is worth noticing behind Gama, a single ally of him begins to roll up his sleeves, showing that Gama's example was beginning to echo. We can see too that the majority group has a flag shut, and the minority group has the flag open. Yep. Gama, by the way, is the one unfurling the flag where it's red, dissident liberals. All of them, finally, have their mouths shut, except for the curious mediator who was, after all, a literary character from a French novel, O Cabrion, and Gama himself. In the fight between the two groups, the pro-slavery side won. The dissident group lost space in the Liberal Party, and Gama and Américo de Campos, his most close ally, founded a new political organization called Radical Paulistano, which would become one of the founding groups of the Republican Party in Brazil in 1873. So, Agostini's drawing, however, went unnoticed by the experts. So I'll pose some questions just to think. Why was Gama raising his stick? What did that open flag mean, and what was he saying towards the other group? The answers to these questions are only found in a newspaper that would appear a few months later, still in 1867, an almost completely unknown newspaper, and completely not associated with any kind of black press in Brazil. So, in this newspaper, two unprecedented things in Brazilian history happened. It is the very first time that an editor-in-chief of a newspaper defines himself as a black man. There are dozens of signatures with the name. Let me show you. That's the Democracia newspaper, right? Yeah, here you can see. there are dozens of signatures with the name Afro, right? And it is the 18 or 19 signatures, expressly quoted by Afro. And it is the first time that a political group advocates both the abolition of slavery and combined with a program of elementary education, including the black population, enslaved or freed. From this, we can see that the abolitionism in Brazil begins not in 1879 nor in 1868, as the two main historiographical schools claim, but in 1867, and this time frame is decisive, with the black Luiz Afro Gama advocating both the abolition of slavery and a real universal elementary education program. This is very important because it allows us to revisit the Brazilian history and also the African diaspora history from a new angle, now considering Luiz Gama as the political leader of the abolitionist movement in the last frontier of black slavery in the 9th century. Now we come to the two questions. First, who was Luiz Gama up to the moment of Agostinho's drawing? At this very moment, at this very moment, 1867. And second, who would he become after starting Brazilian abolitionist movement in the pages of Democracia? Okay? At that time, very few people knew his personal history, and Gama himself kept it under lock and key. Only 15 years later, he would tell his story, which, like Douglass, can be called My Bondage and My Freedom, or Narratives from a Slave written by himself. So, I'll give a very brief note through Gama's world, quoting many passages from his autobiography, okay? And that's the city of Salvador, really close square of his house, so it's really close, the place where he's born, from this square, the Praça da Piedade in Salvador. And that's drawing exactly from the same decade that he was born. So, Gama was born in Salvador, province of Bahia, on June 21st, 1830. At the time, the city that was the first capital of colonial Brazil was the second most populous in the Empire of Brazil, besides being one of the 10 largest in the Atlantic world. Was arguably the city, right, Salvador, was arguably one of the most African cities in the Americas. Black people were 78% of the total population of Salvador. Gama was the son of a white man of Portuguese background and of a, quote, black African freed woman from Costa da Mina, from the Nago nation, named Luisa Maim. Let's take a look first on his mother. Gama described his mother as, quote, a pagan who always refused baptism and Christian doctrine. In addition, he defined his mother as ornery, restless, and vengeful. That's his definition, precise definition. It's really strong, right? He also said that she worked as a greengrocer and that more than once in Bahia she was arrested as a suspect of being involved in enslaving insurrection's plan. One more piece of information. Gama emphasizes that his mother was caught with other Africans, had been put in prison, and both she and her companions disappeared. Gama believed that these rioters, and here he included his mother, were cast away by the government, which at the time treated with great rigor Africans who were seen as provocators. That's the definition of Gama, right? And since his mother's arrest in March 1838, Gama lived under his father's care. And that's definitely a turning point in his life. Look what happened. Gama's father, and that's again a quote of Gama, reduced to extreme poverty in what appears to have been to the result of gambling debts, went to the port of Bahia on November 10th, 1840, and sold his son as a slave. So, without any legal title, without a deed of sale, through a document fraud, incurring the criminal offense established by the Article 179 of the Empire's Criminal Code, which rejected the hypothesis of enslavement of a free person, the white nobleman enslaved his 10-year-old black son. Yeah. On that endless night, Gama lived a nightmare that would last 8 years, and Rio de Janeiro would be just the first stop of a long ordeal. In the capital of the empire, also the largest slave city in the Americas at the time, the dealer and smuggler, also a quote from Gama's autobiography, Cardoso, bought the child and another 100 enslaved people. He set up a caravan. Oh, and that's the port of Bahia, sorry. Yeah, and here's the entry of the Guanabara Bay in Rio de Janeiro, exactly at that time. Yeah, so here that's the scenario that Gama's life from 10 years to 52 when he passed away happened. The state of São Paulo, and in there we can see Brazil, South America, and São Paulo is the southeast of the empire. Cardoso bought the child and another 100 enslaved people. He set up a caravan from Rio to Santos. I think you can see precisely here. Santos, the bigger city in yeah. And from Rio to Santos, and then from Santos to the hinterlands of São Paulo. The first part was by sea and the second on foot, in a route of about 200 miles. Yeah, counting the ascent of the Serra do Mar to São Paulo, then Jundiaí and Campinas, and finally returning to São Paulo city's downtown. According to Lúcio de Mendonça, Gama's friend that later became a Supreme Court justice, now in the Brazilian Republic system, Lúcio de Mendonça said, on foot at the age of 10, Luiz made all the way from Santos to Campinas. A slave coming out of a tragic childhood, barefoot, helpless, hungry, he climbed among a band of slaves the rough mountain range of Cubatão. That's perhaps the most impacted description at the time. This quote is from 1880 exactly. So the smuggler Cardoso tried to sell Gama in at least 3 different slave trade markets. In all of them, the 10-year-old Gama had been rejected by slave buyers. The reason? It is he who explains. I was chosen by many buyers in this city, São Paulo, in Jundiaí and Campinas, and repelled by everyone as bad things are usually repelled, for the simple fact that I came from Bahia. The prejudice was worthwhile for me. But how could a single factor motivate slave buyers in 3 different trading areas to decide in such analogous way? The African or Afro-Brazilian enslaved coming from Bahia were seen at the time, especially in the southeast of the empire, as audacious, subversive, and politically articulated. Facing the lack of interest by the buyers, the smuggler Cardoso kept Gama and another Bahian enslaved by the name of José, a shoemaker, as his personal slave property. Thus, in the same December 1840 or the beginning of 1841, January probably too, Gama found himself in the city of São Paulo, and that's the main street that he lived for 80 years enslaved. Unlike Salvador, and that's a really important aspect to have in mind, unlike Salvador, São Paulo had a considerably smaller community of enslaved, freed, or freed blacks, no more than 20% of the general population. This fact narrowed the possibilities for freedom, such as manumission, freedom suits, coartación, informal community funds for emancipation, or even institutional channels for claiming rights. Certainly out of surviving instinct in that hostile São Paulo, Gama soon had to establish bounds of solidarity. It is quite possible that the shoemaker José, quote, repelled as rubbish for being a Bahian along with him, became for Gama, a first protector in the little Africa, Pequena Africa, that was the São Paulo downtown at the time. This hypothesis does make sense since shoemaking was one of the crafts that Gama soon learned and practiced for years. In 1848, at the age of 18, Gama escaped from captivity. He set out on the run, and he said, "I withdrew and fled," after having secretly, and here's another quote, secretly obtained indisputable proofs of his freedom. We don't know much more than that. Fled, where to, how did he get that indisputable proofs? And by the way, what kind of proof was that? We do not know exactly, and his autobiography has ciphered passages and other excerpts that, in addition to being ciphered, are also enigmatic. There is, however, a suggestive line of continuity between the steps that led to the end of 80 years of slavery. The first and decisive step was to acquire basic literacy. The assumption for obtaining the freedom papers and the subsequent escape was literacy. This is why the sentence, "as I knew how to read and count things," precedes and connects to the following one, "having secretly obtained indisputable proofs of my freedom." Only with this in mind does Gama conclude with the famous, "I fled the house of Lieutenant Antonio Pereira Cardoso, who in fact held me in the highest esteem. Then I proceeded to enlist myself." There is a lot of tension, violence, anguish, uncertainty, and also hope in this interstice in his biography. But if literacy had been the cornerstone of his escape plan or of his freedom strategy, how and when, after all, Gama learned to read and write? In the year before he escaped from captivity, in 1847, he met and became friends with Antonio Rodrigues, a young white man from the interior of the province who had come to São Paulo to study at the law school. And luckily for Gama, the boy went to live as a guest in the same house on Commercio Street, where Gama lived as enslaved. From living relatively close comes friendship, and from friendship, literacy. And I'm quoting Gama. "We became close friends, like dear brothers, and he started teaching me the first letters." In this way, Rodrigues was the one who directly taught Gama to read and indirectly introduced him to the world of law, since he was his first friend within São Paulo Law School. And here's the Igreja do Rosário dos Homens Pretos, the black church. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And Gama was quite part of the community. In addition to basic literacy and indisputable proofs, Gama took along two additional elements in his escape, quoting, "an unshakable will to learn," and the spirit of someone who had, another quote, "sworn an implacable hatred towards slaveholders." I don't know if this translation makes sense, but it's a quite a strong sentence in Portuguese, at least. I don't know if that's, in any case, you say that's my fault, okay? All right. His hatred, by the way, had been sought cured slowly in the undue captivity that he had suffered for 80 years. He had learned in the hard way through his own father's infamy. It was the hate, in short, for understanding the horror of slavery, was the white man's power to enslave the black man and the black women. Like Frederick Douglass or William Wells Brown, Gama greatly valued the opportunity of literacy. It was for him too like stones that, now quoting Douglass, paved his pathway from slavery to freedom. This understanding of the horror of slavery went deep into his understanding on the foundations of law, politics, society. And again, like Douglass, Gama took this deep understanding to his future struggles. After his escape, Gama enlisted himself as a soldier in a local police force. By 1850, we can already find him in official records. In a police investigation from April 1850, the 19-year-old Gama appears in the record as an escort, and what is more interesting, considering the prestige that literacy conferred on him, he signs a report at the request of a soldier colleague. For 6 years, Gama was in the military. In yet another twist of his suffering life, he would be imprisoned for 39 days for an act, again quoting, act of alleged insubordination. After his time in prison, once again literacy opened doors for him. Because of his literacy, he would be appointed by the chief of police to work first as a copyist, then as a scrivener, and then as a clerk in the police department headquarters, São Paulo. In this police office, he spent long 15 years and carried out many tasks. I argue in detail in my thesis that it was in this office where he studied law, because it was there, in short, where he read first all the local normative precedents, second, thousands of police reports, including secret ones, and third, hundreds of official communications from authorities at various levels. For example, hundreds of letters from judges to local police officers. By reading all of these documents, Gama became deeply acquainted with the uses of a law in a slave society, especially the uses of law to enslave and kill blacks in Brazil, or, in the other hand, to guarantee freedom and rights to that same black population. While working in the police office, Gama was reading everything. He was reading Dante Alighieri's comedy. He was reading Miguel de Cervantes' fiction. He was reading Greek mythology encyclopedias. He was reading Victor Hugo's novels. He was reading Jeremy Bentham's political text and Frederick Douglass' legal doctrine. And he was reading the Civil War news, and, for instance, John Brown's speeches. That's why he declares that, some years later, that, I'm quoting Gama, against the positivism of smooth enslavement, I propose a positivism of freedom revolutions. I shall be as mad as John Brown, as Spartacus, as Lincoln, as Jesus. I detest, nevertheless, the Pharisaic calmness of Pilates. So he's natural mind to deal with all that, positivism that he was facing. By the way, in the same year of John Brown's death, in 1859, Gama would publish his first and only book of poems, which makes him, therefore, the first black writer in the history of Brazil. From poetry, Gama would migrate to other styles, such as the chronicle, political writings, and pragmatic normative literature. Even before he raised the abolitionist flag in the newspaper Democracia, he founded 2 other newspapers that are the first 2 illustrated newspapers in São Paulo. Yeah, that's some quotes from Gama that I will move because I just said. So when he launched the Democracia political newspaper in 1867, Gama had a vast knowledge in 2 fundamental areas for abolitionist propaganda, namely the press and the law. And perhaps I would like to highlight a lot this. In the press, he mastered all the phases of producing and publishing a newspaper, but also and mainly he was a talented journalist who knew how to write about any relevant political subject, criticizing the church or analyzing a political decision, and in the field of law, Gama already knew all the Portuguese and Brazilian manumission norms. By the time, he already knew how to litigate freedom claims. It was this rare combination of deep knowledge of how the press operated and how to use freedom claims before courts in a slave society that made him the pioneer of abolitionist propaganda in Brazil. I think I have answered the first question, and I'll quickly run to the second one, and which is, after all, who did Luiz Gama become after starting the abolitionist movement? I can briefly summarize as follows. To the slaveholders, Gama became feared and even hated. More than once he received death threats. He once wrote a private letter to his son, Benedito, where he said, "Remember that I wrote this letter in a supreme moment under the threat of assassination. Have compassion on your enemies, for I have compassion on the fate of mine." For the black people, on the other way around, he becomes their hope for freedom, and not a utopian or metaphysical freedom, but a concrete one, real freedom to be enjoyed immediately. In my accounts, and I know the name, age, civil status, ancestry, family background of the vast majority of them, Gama freed more than 700 black people through freedom claims in the courts of São Paulo. We have already seen that Gama launched the radical abolitionist propaganda in 1867, and have that in mind, only a year and a half later, in 1869, he was fired from the police office in a notoriously fraudulent process. Fired, and as we read in the sources, threatened with deportation, but deportation to wherever else, but Africa. He was threatened to deportation to Africa at the time. His firing had national and even international repercussions. The Anglo-Brazilian Times, for instance, reported Gama's firing in one of its covers. It turned out that only 3 weeks after being fired, he cleverly exploited a norm and applied it to a local judge for the right to practice law despite lacking a law degree. He argued that, on the one hand, there was a lack of lawyers in town, which the judge found to be true, and on the other hand, that he possessed notorious legal knowledge. Surprisingly or not, the judge granted his request. And what does he do with a full license to practice law? He builds abolitionists within the law. I don't have much more time. Let me see. I put it here. Oh my God. Yeah. I wasn't. Yeah. So I'll make short. I'll give you one big example, and excuse me in advance for getting into a more technical legal vocabulary. Immediately after being legally entitled to practice law, Gama filed a lawsuit that would become epic, one that would become, and that's a strong, assertion, that the biggest freedom lawsuits in the Americas. So I'll move fast here. Having learned through the press of the death of one of the richest men in the empire, Ferreira Neto, Gama followed step by step the legal discussion in the press between Neto's heirs and partners until the opportune moment to enter the dispute on behalf of the enslaved. I'll see how I move here. Just a sec. Perhaps I'll try to move from here. I'll do my best to try to freestyle, something on that lawsuit. But he was following the debate, the legal debate in the press, and paying close attention to what's happening. And he noticed it, and most probably by the blacks, he was really famous at the time. He was raised in the little Africa of São Paulo. And he noticed that lawsuit was discussing, among other things, the freedom of more than 200 enslaved persons. And he asked to the judge only the name and the place that they were located at the time. So I'm Luiz Gama, and I'm not representing nobody, but I would like to know this public information on the last will of the Ferreira Neto, you know, and he achieved this information. He got this information, and with this information, he filled out a kind of different lawsuit that is not exactly a freedom suit, but he argued since the beginning, guys, nobody there, 217 people, nobody there could be defined as a slave. Because in the last will of this Ferreira Neto, there's a single and slightly sentence saying, I'll declare all my slaves free. But, you know, that was a last will like from 20 years back there. And when he managed to argue that, and the judge find this argument appealing, convinced, and he ruled in favor of this 217 freedom of this 217 enslaved person. When when that happened, I will just read one paragraph, and I am finishing. Yeah. Now the situation, when he does that, now the situation has become more serious. Death threats have appeared in the press, and the opposing party hired 3 law professors, among them that José Bonifácio, the famous abolitionist, who had now become a passionate pro-slave partisan. They were all against Gama. Now, for now, it should be said that the sentence confirms Gama's arguments and declared all 217 blacks free. Now they achieved the status of freedmen and freedwomen. However, Neto's heirs and partners appealed first to the second instance, then to the 3 other jurisdictions, and finally to the Supreme Court. They lost in all of them, and the sentence from the local judge in Santos was then confirmed, especially in the acceptance of Gama's central argument. The last will never revoked in life to produce normative effects, including the legal guardianship one. It's a kind of argument that he creatively write about that. There's not the Portuguese doctrine, only in the civil law procedure doctrine in Portugal. Yeah, but when he won this freedom claim, and now I'm finishing, exactly 150 years ago, in 1872, he became nationally known not more as a political activist, but as an abolitionist lawyer. In a few years, he would become one of the 3 best paid in the city of São Paulo, but really, really well known in the press and throughout Brazil. His law office became highly demanded by clients from all social classes and nationalities. Although among the best paid, he never charged to defend the enslaved, and I have the records to that to make this assumption claim. Yeah, thank you. And there were more than 100 freedom suits proving that point. And he never advocated for the interests of any alleged slave owner. Gama wrote abolitionist through law and law through abolitionism. Does anyone here know anything like that in the world? That's a question that I'd like to debate with you guys. That know many things more in any different place of the world. So, have you heard something like that? Someone writing abolitionism through freedom claims in this way for more than 12 years and achieving these 700 and freedoms through the courts? So I spoke a lot. What was that? Yeah, but I just, yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bruno, for your passionate presentation, as I expected. I wanted to open the floor for anyone. If you have questions to Bruno, I think the debate is as interesting as the presentation itself. Would anyone like to begin?
I don't have a question yet, but I was thinking when you were describing the legal argument that he presented, the word that came to mind, although it doesn't fit, is so he did a class action suit.
Yeah, that's true.
Except that class race action suit.
That's a excellent definition. Yeah.
Should get this sentence for the book.
Yeah, please write down your name to properly quote you. Yeah, and in this session here, that makes that possible, right? Yeah.
So I came in a little bit late. I'm sorry for that. I actually was in one place. But you know, I was struck because I read literature, and you probably know this. You know, so I love it myself. It's wrote a novel, The Fifth Core, right?
Yeah,
You know, and then you have the recent film on Luiz Gama.
Yeah.
You know, and I was just wondering, like, how do you deal with this literariness of his life and his own, you know, subject? He's making it himself as a subject also through writing, through literature in a way, right?
What can you say just to start? Like we are in 2022, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a shame for Brazilian or all worldwide intellectuals or scholars and so on or activists that we don't know. I can guarantee you, we don't know 10% of Luiz Gama
Or his mother.
or his mother. We don't, and his words and his writings. So
they're not examined sufficiently.
yeah, no, not that we don't know. Because I've been in the archives for the last 10 years. That's why I'm like this one, you know? You get it? Yeah, that's a price to pay, right? And I found more than 700 texts that nobody accessed before. What do you say about that? So it's a really, I mean, of course, I read the novel. It's a good one and a beautiful one, and it became perhaps a film series in the near future. I also saw the film, but you know, we are. I opened the very first sentence of all 11 books is in 2030 we will commemorate the bicentennial of Luiz Gama's birth. Right? Is that correct? The sentence, but it's not just 200 years of his birth. So what I'm trying to pose is, we have a long run to know a bit better. Even his most famous text, we don't have anything studying in depth. Not to say anything, but it's too little. For instance, I'm not proud that my dissertation is the first one studied in a law faculty, in a law school. I mean, if Gama was born in the US, just speculating here, we'll know his complete works at least, I think, at least 5 decades, 50 years, or more than that. I think we are dealing with a brilliant writer, a genius, I would say. If not, there's no problem in trying to emphasize. He doesn't need that to emphasize his life and works, but and we should read it because we are talking about a poet that brings poetry to law, and a kind of, you know, political activist that bringing politics into poetry too. You know, he is the first one that say I'm black in Brazilian society. Say I'm black, and he's doing a sophisticated way to mock with his rivals, and whoa, and we don't know it. I mean, Gama would be name of a city, of university. All his contemporary name of cities, right? All of them. So it's a case. I don't know how to translate, but like was really in purpose to have all generations that followed Gama, and I mean the generation from the beginning of 20th century, not know him, to not read him. He was banished. You know, he was taken off any kind of. Just seeing 1 or 2 pieces survive the last 20 years, and then it's an effort from generations since 1904, going to the archives to find things. And we have known now 150 texts. And among that, 50 poems in 150. Now the complete work is this 150 plus 700. And I hope so that in the future we'll find more things. It was a brilliant mind and a quite, you know, strategist and how to write. He was inventing newspapers, and the pro-slavery militia was closing it. That's why he founded let me say 7, 8 newspapers. But he founded one that lasted like 8 months, 9 months, 1 year. They took down. Yeah.
You said you want debate, so I want to push back on
Okay.
Actually, it's on Lima's statement, because in the Black movement, he is mythically popular. I've heard everything from rap songs to poetry to all the popular music of Brazil, little children's poems in school. I mean, they have taken. You said 50 poems, so I don't know which of the 50. There are 2 or 3 that one knows pretty well. And there is an immense popular corpus, mostly oral, about Luiz Gama. So it's a question of the academics might not be studying Luiz Gama, but the people who know him in Sao Paulo, Salvador, they have taken him up, whether it's apocryphal or what, that doesn't matter, but they've taken his name and some of the lines from his poetry. And as you would know about his mother, Luisa Maim, there's a whole mythology and set of stories, and the images that you used on the front on the title page of your presentation, those images are widely circulated, reconfigured, redone. No, the mother on the front, the title page.
Sorry.
And no one knows if some of those are not his mother, but the one with the lady with the kind of decote over there. She's repurposed and reused for various Black women, including Luisa Maim. And nobody knows if that's really
absolutely sure that
or not. But my point is
that
the popular appropriation of him, his work, his life, some of his poetry and what he meant has taken place. I can't say whether the academic work has kept pace with that.
No.
Can I just add to that though? I mean, I think you're absolutely right, but I find, again, coming from the study of literature, literary writers, right, have appropriated Luisa Maim much more than the figure of Luiz Gama. She has become an icon in the writings of contemporary Afro-Brazilian writers. He appears, but not as much, which is really interesting since he is the literato, right? So I also wonder about, what's going on there.
Yeah. What about the Luiz Gama Institute and human rights, etc.? How is that kind of broken into this space of unknowingness? I should say, to open up that academic side or give more space to the work of Luiz Gama. Has it?
I don't think so. To answer more, I don't think. So it's just what you said. Sorry, it's just a title. Yeah, in my opinion, and I know Professor Silvio Luiz Almeida, and I can say that unfortunately it's just that. It's just the name, and I'm ready to. But I'll come to your question, challenging question. I like that. Let me say, I lived in Salvador, the city that I most lived in my life is Salvador, and I was born in São Paulo. And I've been, I know that and promoted some activities and being part of activities to try to talk about Gamas. But look, Salvador has like 3 million people living there. São Paulo 20, if you think the city is around São Paulo. Look, the scenario is so bad. Thinking about memory or thinking about the past and how we deal with that, that I think we don't have. I will give a big number, okay? I will super estimate it, but I think we don't have 50 persons reading Luiz Gama alive. Reading Luiz Gama.
You mean scholars?
everybody. So I used to say like 10, but I'll give 50. And I say them and I know the names. And that's a misery. That reflects the misery that Brazilian society in dealing with its past and constructing a more sophisticated way of reproducing racism in all areas and how to share power. That's why. So we never studied Luiz Gama in law school, and he was an original professor outside academia, and if you open Google and try to Google it, how Luiz Gama learned law. The law school has a quite strong version, and Marcelo knows that because he studied there. We taught Luiz Gama. Luiz Gama studied here. Luiz Gama studied here, Law School of São Paulo. And last year, to make this narrative more strong, what the president of the university, the biggest university in Brazil, University of São Paulo, said, Luiz Gama is one of ours, and he's now a honoris causa, doctor, and he that. Yeah, now, yeah, last year. So they're trying to say that, we have a vigorous debate, and Luiz Gama and Luiza Maim, we are proud of that. So we'll see. Luiz Gama, 2 years ago, I guess, President Temer, so 2 years ago, put his name in the Panteão da Pátria. How to say that? Yeah, thank you. So they are trying to fake, and Gama wisely saw the process of his memory. So a novelist, Raul Pompeia, said, this guy know one thing. He soube se excluir. He knew how to exclude himself from the political. He's trying to say from the political. So this being record, right? I'm seeing like there. I hope you are hearing me. But it's a shame for Brazil. No more than 50 people. No, I live in Salvador. No scholar, no academic. But also, look, I gave an interview to a newspaper in Brazil saying that, agreeing with your point, if Luiz Gama is surviving, that is not related to the scholars. That's related to a correio na go. That's an expression that I gave in the interview. Due to a correio na go is like a oral way to. Yeah, that's the expression. Black grapevine. I like that one. Another quote for you. What's your name? Yeah.
Just a question, because the system of quotas has changed in Brazilian universities.
Sorry, I don't get it. The beginning.
The system of quotas.
Quotas. Okay.
Has changed university enrollments,
Yeah.
etc. And that, we're now starting to see the impact of that, because the students that started are now becoming professors, and now we have a government that's destroying this, but that's the fear of them. But is there potentiality in changing at the law school who the professors are, and an interest in those younger students who are saying, hold on here, this has been silenced, right, in terms of representation, in terms of recognizing that? Do you see any potential?
Totally, 100% I agree with you, because there is a lot of potential to that. I'm for the first class of Programa Universidade para Todos, which is like perhaps the main quotas for public school and blacks in Brazil, right? Like, I don't know, 1 million people come. So that's why I'm first gen in in academia, in law school. So what I mean, there's a lot of potential. And that's why we are seeing this movie going on down there, no? That's why. Because we're becoming professors in the future, and we are trying to make justice to some historical characters and social movements at the time, claiming for freedom and for rights. That's not a story that is begun. And the Brazilian was not invented in the 20th century. Brazil has more deep roots, So I totally agree. There's a lot of potential, and brilliant, intelligent people coming from the most precarious school system possible, and thinking ahead Brazilian history. That's I when I posted that sentence in 2030, it's somehow trying to see if we can. Yeah. This is a proof copy, so I don't have if that sentence is there. I guess so, but that too, it's for sure. I will launch in November because November is a Black Conscience. Yeah,
Black Consciousness Month.
Yeah, month. Yeah.
If
Thanks.
I can just offer like
Please,
testimony that might be helpful. Like I studied at law school at the University of São Paulo from 2005 to 2009, and I remember back then there were 3 black students. There were, I think, total 250 of us. There were 3 black students. 2 of them came from Africa, and they were just like studying in São Paulo for a while, and they'll be back. And by then there was a big event celebrating Luiz Gama, and I remember I was a young student, I didn't know who he was, and there was this image like Luiz Gama studied here, like he was hiding in class so that he could learn law, and that's how he became a lawyer. So there was this appropriation of Gama by then, but it was like not that powerful. 10 years later, there's a very strong black movement among students at law school at the University of São Paulo, and this is completely new. And this is one of the.
Yeah, but I say Brazil has 1,000 law schools. 1,000. We're talking the main central one, right? Look at the others law school if you see any single reference on Luiz Gama's existence. So that I mean I know. I was wondering which popular music song lyrics quote Luiz Gama from the last before. Which rap song? Which one?
I wish I could go back. I have a film in the city. What do you call it? The municipal chamber in Salvador.
Câmara Municipal.
Câmara Municipal. When the first some of the more recent black members of city council were invested. Got into office. They had a kind of a popular thing where people came in, and several groups of young black people came in, and one declaimed Luiz Gama's poem, and the other group did this rap song that they made up based on his lyrics. The same group also used lyrics from Marcus Garvey. You could tell where their black consciousness is, and Bob Marley and so forth. But they worked it into rap songs. And if it really does happen. And a lot of young black kids declaim that one famous poem, and I can't remember.
Abodahada. Quem sou eu?
Probably. Yes, that one. And so they do with it, even the people in the samba groups, they take lyrics from something and they'll make it. That's not the same as a scholarly book, and I'm not saying that there shouldn't be. But they do, the black movement has made him a popular figure in which, sort of like a cipher, people can, make stuff off of. The rap song talks about him being a lawyer and him being this and that and whatever. I don't think it's commercial.
Which year? Because I've been in some sessions in the Municipal Chamber of Salvador. I voted for Silvio Humberto, for instance. Yeah, I voted for him. I voted for him twice. The 2 elections that I was. And I participated in some of that. And
one of those programs where the public came in for the first time. That's where it was a celebration of something. It might have been Black Consciousness Month. But these kids came in and they did this as a poem.
Yeah, I know precisely who is this guys. And I would say, I know it's Jansen Nascimento, the only guy that knows. It's a big poem. This Quem Sou Eu is really difficult to memorize it. And Márcio Luiz, the second guy that probably. But look, it's a 3 million people city. Even though if we have I'm in really we are like asking for because in my opinion, if we don't understand Gama, we can have an idea on the Reconstruction era. The abolitionists didn't finish in 1870, in 1865. That's the point. The abolition, and I know plenty of books that April 1865 we're done here and finished. And the story goes and goes and goes in many layers. And Brazil is reading perhaps but a decisive chapter on this story, on this. So, and in my opinion, to read Gama, and we should, I don't know how, but Gama should be in English, translated in English. Douglass is in Portuguese, part of Douglass, not all Douglass. But Gama should be in English, in Spanish, at least these two languages. And studied here, and studied in law schools, and studied in literature departments, and he founded newspaper. He's an artist, right? The first illustrated newspapers in Brazil. He founded and wrote it for them. And so we knew, and yeah, that's perhaps my claim in the last years. And since Marcel knows me, I don't know how long, but I've been talking a lot. And like Jansen Nascimento, probably that guy, he's doing the same. I learned something really interesting. So about Luiz Gama with troopers, I learned something. But with Bruno Lima, a guy from the Bangla street, the same street that was born Gama, never read a book. And I've been with dozens times with Mãe Stella de Oxóssi, doctorate honoris causa from Bahia, a black priestess, thank you, that knew Luiz Gama pretty well, even though I agree in your point. That's why Gama survives in Brazil. So it's not, of course, a work that's starting or building or that's beginning now. For sure, it's not that. For sure. But the fact is, in a group of almost 1,000 texts, this generation, only know 150. Yeah.
Thanks very much, and it's really fascinating what you're saying. And I was trying to think about how do you think about his abolitionism? Would you consider him to be belonging to what some of us would call in the Americas a black abolitionism? Not that he's a black abolitionist, and whether it's the abolitionism by law or by journalism, but that his political work is really a kind of black abolitionism, which is different from white abolitionism, because black abolitionism claims things for African people, education, etc., etc. It is not just about equality, right? And it's not just about I am your brother. It is much more like full on your system. Is that I'm a full human being deserving of certain rights that all human beings have. And so I'm trying to think how can we think about his political ideas as a part of a black abolitionism in the Americas, and he represents something else because it's Brazil and every country has its own historical specificities. So as I listen to you, that's what I'm trying to think about. Not that he's a black abolitionist, but that he's actually a black abolitionism as a set of political.
Look, in that book, Liberdade, the green lines one, he was almost blind, 50 years old, suffering, walking with many, pain, and he writes 11 texts to a black journalist in Rio. That he was the owner of that newspaper in Rio, Ferreira de Menezes, and he wrote 11 letters. Only knew now. We only knew these letters now. This generation. We only knew one piece of these 11. So he wrote 11 letters to this black fellow and dramaturgo. Dramaturg, thank you. yeah. And if there's not creating a definition of black abolitionism, so there is nowhere. I don't know what is black abolitionist. Not black abolitionist, as you mentioned, but black abolitionism. He's writing to a black man in a black press newspaper, and supporting José do Patrocínio in one of these pieces, a black journalist, and he's saying, em nós até a cor é um defeito, which comes the sentence of the novel, because in ourselves, the skin color is
a
prejudice or
it's a defect. It's like
it's
fault. Yeah.
fault. And it's really strong. In these 11 texts, Carta a Ferreira de Menezes, letter to Ferreira de Menezes. But there's connecting the dots of other texts. We'll find this kind of what this blind man, almost blind man, still acting before the courts, what he had in mind. And it's that's why he said that the Minister of Justice of Brazil, Nabucco de Araújo, a big law professor and politician, ordered the killing 2 black men. And he had proofs of that. And he said, this guy, Nabucco de Araújo, this big politician, was the dad of Joaquim Nabuco. Father of Joaquim Nabuco. Joaquim Nabuco was the guy that wrote the memories of abolitionism in Brazil. Everybody, if you want to know what was abolitionism in Brazil, the name of the book is Abolitionism. Everybody read there. That's the source. And he posed really, cleverly, with many quotes. I don't have the word in English. Gama in second row or third row, fourth row position. As a passionate, as a good heart, but no ideas, He doesn't know how to. Emotional guy. And Gama wrote, your father ordered the killing of 2 blacks in 1844 and in 1854, and I have the proofs. And I have here. He was a police officer at the time, and I found these things. I found these proofs. And he gives details on that. So, for instance, his autobiography is so powerful, right? I think everybody here agrees on that. And he's saying, but it's too much for some people. Okay, he's fictionalizing. He's just imagining. He just, And what we should do, I think, go to the source. All sources available and try to check. Not doubting his word, not that, but to this generation, try. Look, what he's saying that he gave many dates, events, name of people. He's really precise in his memories. So, but in that book is the abolitionist campaign that he understands. That's the point, perhaps, to answer you more precisely. He's saying, the Brazilian state has the terror, the racism, o terror da raça. Say that Brazilian state has terror against blacks in its foundation. Yeah. And understanding that, he'll say, how to fight that. And he'll say, please translate that. He'll say, in this same time, it's there in another text. Neste país da sagrada liberdade já não é dado o direito ao negro divertir-se. Oh, that's all quote from Gama. Let's say, in this country of classic liberty, classic freedom, the black man can't having the right to not have fun, enjoy life. Yeah, something. So what we should do in this case? He posed this question, and his answer is something even more strong than this sentence. And he said, so what he said, his understanding, the Brazilian is moving from monarchy to republican governments, and and the last decades and more that decade in particular, they are attaching whiteness to citizenship and blackness to slavery or former slave civil status. He understands that, and he writes his abolitionism writing, having that in mind. So, in my opinion, even the concept of black abolitionists, we will learn a lot. The people that want to develop this concept, and I'm really interested in it, is to see how he understands the full picture, not exactly the full picture, but what was allowed to a historical character at that time with all the limits, But he writes how to face that, and killing the emperor was one of the measures.
How long is that piece?
It is like 70 pages. Yeah, 70. Not 17, 70 pages. It's a really long one, right? And if you combine there with questão jurídica, 1 and 2, we have like 100 pages. And then come this 500 volume, but his abolitionism views, it's spread in all his, that's the point, it's spread in all 11 books. If not 11, 9 to 10, I can guarantee you. But there's the concentration of the last, the view of the process before dying, almost like 1.5 years before dying.
It would be a great project to get that. That's why I asked you how many pages, to get it translated and annotated and commented.
No, when I've been in touch with many press houses in Brazil in the last years and saying, look, I found this, it's 5,500 pages, 11 volumes, 5,500 pages. I see like, we don't need a book. And I will say, I want a book that stands up. That's
the test for a good book?
Yeah, that's my text. No, not for a good book. But thinking as a jurist, as a political leader, as a strategist, it can be something, with all due respect, I like the way, but I'm in Portuguese, of course for English, it's another scenario, but the books must stand up. That's my criteria. and we're talking in 11. So I'm seeing like a shelf, so we would say shelf, a shelf of books. I would like to, we have 1,000 law schools in Brazil, so we must have 11 books of Gama in this law school. And I put in my name in the cover. Not here, because who I am, right? To quote Gama, quem sou eu, right? Yeah, and who am I, right? Yeah, thank you. And so, and no figures as well. No image, only text. So it's a kind of artistic or aesthetic concept. Gama stands by himself. And I can say, since you mentioned this generation, I've been in Berlin with President Lula some months ago. He was in Berlin to talk with Olaf Scholz. And I've been there, why not? If he's coming to talk with the chancellor, why not? He will not receive me, come on. And I've been there in his hotel, I talk a lot. And I said, I gave these volumes to him and so on. And he said, winning the election, that's nothing in the end to what's happening in Brazil. But that's important. But that's a really important one, the really dear one. So when I say law school, it's not law schools, it's elementary schools. Gama should be elementary school students, middle school, high school students. That's, I think, law, but of course, Gama, I quote in another interview, Gama tem que estar na cesta básica literária nacional. How you say that? So, Gama should be in the national, we have, how to say cesta básica?
It's WIC, right? Is in the United States, but it'd be the equivalent.
Yeah,
Gama should be in the WIC.
It's the prescribed text for
It's like just
that you must read.
Yeah, must read, but I must read to everybody.
Yeah,
Should educate it.
It's the same thing with Gama. I'm from Jamaica. And Marcus Garvey is not in the high schools. Right? And we have friends who I have friends who have worked, who are Garvey scholars, and who have tried their best to get it into the high schools. I mean, and have retired, some have retired.
And it's also the parallel case that it is the popular memory of Marcus Garvey that keeps it
Because Garvey's memory is kept alive by Rastafari first.
Yep.
That's the memory.
I can assure you that Garvey is was well known in Brazil than Gama in Brazil.
Yes.
I can compare.
I would not be
Yeah.
surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, just to put a little bit of a positive spin and this absence, which I think, it seems in Brazil we have many of these absences. It's definitely Luiz Gama, but there's many other figures also, But I think that the incorporation of the how popular culture reclaims some of these figures, it ends up getting into the curriculum, be it in high schools, be it in universities. It does have an impact. It's interesting in a way, right? So you have, for example, more recently, reclaiming of Maria Fernanda dos Reis, Carolina Magna de Jesus, etc. And even, Machado de Assis was a very canonical figure, but, kind of the realization, oh wow, yeah, he was Afro-descendant, and he wrote about Afro-descendant themes, things like that. So I think that there is a movement there. I mean, you might have to do the quotas, there were also public policies that were put in place during, Saudosos Anos Lula. So, I mean, hopefully, hopefully this book, which stands by itself, obviously, will, also help.
Yeah. The 11. It's like a football team, 11. That's why, yeah.
Now I get it.
Yeah.
No, but from the basic work that you're doing, I really want to thank you. The presentation was wonderful.
Come on.
From the basic work that you're doing, then other things can flow.
Yeah.
So you are, laying the kind of thing that from there, anybody who really wants to study, if you can read Portuguese, it's there. And I really think it would be an interesting project to do juxtaposing. I don't say comparing because they're different, but juxtaposing Frederick Douglass, Luiz Gama, the women in Martinique who did the post-abolition thing around the question of slavery.
One of the things that needs to probably
Translate.
happen is really not a biography of, but an intellectual, political biography of him in English.
But to do that, you got to have at least some of the basic things in
Yeah.
English.
But if you do that, what that then does is open the passageway for people, for other publishers, and for people to say, okay.
I don't think it's either or. I think thinking through a publishing program, he's obviously done this. I love that. He's done those. And you have to have, without those, you can't do the other. So he's done those. But you asked the question about abolitionism, and I think it's important because we need to know that abolitionism nowhere was led by white people. Abolition was led by the people who needed for it to be abolished. And then there are white people who join with that, who are important and so forth. But I think that scholarship that points out that it's Sojourner Truth or Harriet Tubman or any Frederick Douglass, and not just, or in England, it's not just Wilberforce, but it's a whole set. So that correction of abolitionism is important since you raised it. And so that sounded like a subset that could at least somebody could translate. If it's 70 pages or 150, that's doable. It'll be a while before all 11.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Or both. Yeah, it's Marcelo knows that one of the main ideas coming to the West. So look, that story is you all know it's well integrated. We must now try to make that. So when I talked to one thing to Marcelo was, and I think you totally agree, right? That Gama must be read in English too. And coming here, and I think I know here the center. Even before Marcelo coming here, and there's a kind of space that we know. Not that we don't have exactly in Brazil. We have, of course, clusters thinking about slavery and justice, but something that we are beginning somehow. And it's a quite positive reference. I mean, a beautiful one to and also to do more research on slavery and literature, for instance, in Brazil. And I like the idea of this, but I was just this point because the press house in Brazil offered me this suggestion, but Brazil is another scenario. Said, no, we will publish these 11 texts. It's fine. We have here. No, okay, it's Europe, but no. So every day I was morning. Okay, let me draw a footnote. That's 5,500 footnotes. In 11 volume, it's one footnote per page, plus one short comment to each text. So you open here, every text has a short comment by myself, and then an introduction of 40 pages each volume. That was like how I designed the complete works project, and it took like 4 years to a publisher called me and say, we'll do it, but under one condition: 2 volumes per year, not at the same time, 2 books per year. And I was a bit frustrated, but I understood that the press house market, the publishing market, has its necessities, I would say, needs, and I understood. And okay, fine, 2 per volume. That's why these 2 books, it's coming. These 2. Direito e Crime, Law and Crime. No, Law and Order is that serious, right? No, I got no. What? Yeah, but that's it. But I think think about Gama in English, we'll understand better. In my opinion, we'll understand better Frederick Douglass, even his narratives and his scholarship. We understand better the concepts dear to our research, such as Black abolitionism. And the original thinker, if I wouldn't affiliated him in a kind of line or school, I think he was creating, and he knew that. I'm creating a kind of intellectual set. So, and yeah, I think it would be nice to start with some text, and I'm working this kind of, in Portuguese, this biography, because it's attached, this both.
Yeah, it's both. It's both. We can talk about that.
Okay. You're thinking the thought of Luiz Gama in one
I'm thinking of
smaller volume.
Volume that
Essential.
That introduces and opens up space.
Yeah. And after the space, you can take
Space.
Okay.
This is a discussion we have.
Yeah.
Okay, you can begin with one goal, like you.
He had to
Bring
do
his
this.
name.
I think he did what he needed to do first, which is these. Get a foundation.
Yeah, in Portuguese makes it right. In Portuguese, I have to build up this foundation, and then we think about the biography. Yeah, but I don't know. We are now out of time. Yeah, may I say thank you? Yeah. So, no, come on. I don't know how this absolutely broken English you supported. Come on. Thank you so much. Namaste, for which is Namaste, Axé, for which is Axé, and vai Corinthians.
It could be more like, I'm so glad this is filmed.
Okay. Thank you so much.